Well, you were so practical, I hardly know what to ask. Let's talk about horror stories for a second. I think one of the things that we've tried to show today is that actually understanding what a person goes through who comes forward, who's been a victim legitimately, is important to appreciate in this conversation. And I take it that the principle behind the horror stories is actually very similar, to try and actually communicate that the visceral nature of this to people who otherwise might not appreciate it. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. Nicholas brought up the active shooter training. And when we go through active shooter training, our hearts are pounding and we're feeling like, what are we going to do? Like, this is a crazy situation. And this is the kind of response. We want people to know that your heart is going to be beating and you're going to be in a place of, even if you're not the victim, but you're dealing with it as a church leader, then you need to be prepared for the fact that you're going to want to vomit as this is happening on a daily basis. Like, you need to be prepared for that kind of reaction.
And then I'll talk a little bit about staff risk. You said that if a person becomes trained, then they are actually at risk if they don't follow through on reporting and following up. And they shouldn't take the attitude, oh, I can solve this myself. Really important, right?
Absolutely. For managers.
Yes.
Yes. Managers need to know that they could go to jail if they allow it to happen under their watch and they know about it, or if they're perpetrators of it.
Okay. Then the next question that I have is this 2 levels up and 1 level down thing. I want to talk about the culture that you're working to create that allows that to work. And I see at least three characteristics you may add to the list. Obviously, one is there's a trust about why this is in place and why you're doing this, why this is a good idea. There's a willingness to be, I don't know, I'm having trouble figuring out what word to use, but a generosity in pointing this out. In other words, oversight isn't done in a way that's intending to be hostile. It's an attempt to actually manage the culture of what you're dealing with, and because that, everyone understands it. So that if a report comes that isn't genuinely on target, but at least you're making the effort to cover it, people understand that's what's going on.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons is because with the children, the statistics are different, because children will accuse someone they feel safe with of harming them when it's actually going on at home. And so the statistics are higher, like in 14% of the cases or something. There's children who will falsely accuse, but something really is going on in their lives. It's just somebody else. So in our culture, we want to have that openness, that there is people watching us, because we also want to have a defense just in case there's a wrong allegation.
Okay.
So there is the transparency, because we want that alibi as well, to have 3 people in the room.
And I take it that the third feature, I called the second one generosity. I'm not sure if that's the best word, but the third one is the willingness to be corrected. In other words, I might be doing something that I'm not aware is being read or perceived in a certain way, but I should be aware of it.
Absolutely. Like, we're human, right? So we have blind spots, and we need to be open, and we need to have, in the Speed of Trust training, we talk about doing a 360, and that creates some vulnerability between us because we're giving each other anonymous feedback. And that creates this openness that we all report to each other during training on what our weaknesses are. We broadcast those things. Well, it's a fairly vulnerable situation, but if everyone is there, then it builds trust.
Okay, now my last question is going to be this. Since you work in HR, and this is an area that you're focused on, what do you find to be the most challenging tension about this conversation for you?
I think it's getting the victims to speak. And it is something that we pray about. Like, we as an HR team will pray through Psalm 34 because it talks about the righteous crying out and the Lord hearing them. And we know that only God can bring some things into light. And as Vonda said, sometimes you minimize your own experience and say it's not that big of a deal, but we want to hear all of that. So it's, someone else mentioned, I think it was Nicholas, that they're more likely to share with their coworkers than with HR. So my burden and my constant tension is to create the kind of relationship with our staff where they'd be willing to actually tell us that kind of a deep story. So we have to be available and warm and involved and in a place where we're listening and that we treat serious things seriously.
Let's thank Bea for her contribution.